In this episode, we connect two ideas that beginners often treat separately: sourcing decisions, like whether to buy, build, or outsource, and the broader governance system that steers technology to support enterprise goals. If sourcing is handled as a procurement-only activity, it can produce fast decisions that later create hidden risk, inconsistent controls, and fragmented accountability. If governance ignores sourcing, it can create elegant plans that fail because the enterprise cannot deliver with the capabilities and partners it actually has. Integrating sourcing strategies into governance of enterprise IT, GEIT, means making sourcing part of how the enterprise sets direction, manages risk, measures performance, and optimizes resources across the whole portfolio. This integration strengthens optimization because the enterprise can reduce duplication, standardize where it helps, and spend with clearer intent. It strengthens control because responsibilities, data handling expectations, and resilience requirements are built into relationships and monitored over time. The goal is to help new learners see that sourcing is not an isolated choice, but a governance lever that shapes cost, speed, risk, and long-term adaptability. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our Course Companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first idea to anchor is what sourcing really changes in an enterprise environment. When you source externally, you are not only acquiring a tool or service, you are changing the boundary of your operating model. Some responsibilities move outside the enterprise, but accountability does not, and that difference is where many governance failures begin. If the enterprise depends on a provider for a critical capability, then the provider's reliability, security posture, and change practices become part of the enterprise's risk profile. If the enterprise uses multiple providers, then integration and coordination become governance concerns because failures can occur at the seams between services. Beginners sometimes assume sourcing is primarily a cost decision, but it is also a control decision because it determines who can change what, who can see what, and who must respond when something breaks. Integrating sourcing into GEIT means treating these boundary shifts as governance decisions that must be aligned to strategy and risk tolerance. It also means acknowledging that external relationships can either simplify the enterprise by providing stable capabilities or complicate it by adding new dependencies and fragmented responsibility. The quality of governance is often visible in how well these relationships are managed. Optimization is one of the key reasons to integrate sourcing into governance, because without governance, sourcing choices can become scattered and redundant. Different teams may purchase overlapping services, negotiate separate contracts, and build isolated vendor relationships that increase cost and complexity. This creates vendor sprawl, where the enterprise pays multiple times for similar capabilities and struggles to maintain consistent controls. A governance-integrated sourcing strategy encourages portfolio thinking, meaning the enterprise chooses a manageable set of providers and patterns that support enterprise capabilities consistently. This does not mean choosing a single provider for everything, but it does mean being intentional about where diversity adds resilience and where diversity adds waste. Beginners can think of this as stocking a kitchen. Having 10 different versions of the same utensil does not make cooking better. It makes storage and cleanup harder. Optimization in sourcing often means consolidation, standardization of contract terms, and consistent onboarding requirements that reduce operational burden. When sourcing is integrated into GEIT, optimization becomes an ongoing discipline rather than an occasional cost-cutting campaign. Control is the other major reason integration matters, because control in a sourced environment depends on how responsibilities, evidence, and decision rights are defined and enforced. When sourcing is handled separately from governance, contracts can be signed without clear data handling expectations, without meaningful performance reporting, and without a clear escalation path for incidents. This leaves the enterprise with weak leverage and unclear accountability when problems occur. Integrating sourcing into GEIT means defining governance controls that must be present in sourced relationships, such as requirements for incident notification, access governance, audit evidence, and change coordination. It also means ensuring that these controls are proportionate to risk, so the enterprise does not apply the same level of oversight to low-risk services as it does to critical services. Beginners sometimes assume control means micromanaging providers, but in governance, control is about having the right visibility and enforceable expectations to manage risk responsibly. Control also includes the ability to exit or switch providers without severe disruption, because lack of exit options reduces strategic flexibility and increases dependency risk. When sourcing strategy is integrated into governance, control is designed and monitored rather than assumed. A practical integration step is aligning sourcing decisions to enterprise architecture direction and capability planning, because sourcing affects how capabilities are delivered and how systems fit together. If the enterprise architecture calls for shared identity and consistent logging, sourcing decisions should reinforce that by selecting providers that can integrate cleanly with those enterprise patterns. If sourcing decisions ignore architecture, the enterprise can end up with services that require separate identity systems, inconsistent monitoring, or proprietary integration patterns that increase complexity. Capability planning also matters because it helps the enterprise decide which capabilities should be internal differentiators and which can be sourced as commodities. Beginners might assume the enterprise should always outsource commodity functions, but governance must still consider data sensitivity, criticality, and resilience. Integrating sourcing into GEIT means that sourcing is discussed during strategic planning, not only after a project is approved. This allows the enterprise to choose sourcing approaches that align with long-term direction, rather than selecting providers opportunistically under deadline pressure. When sourcing supports architecture and capabilities, the enterprise is more coherent and easier to govern. Risk management is another essential integration point because sourcing creates third-party risk and supply chain dependencies. Governance should ensure that third-party risk assessments are integrated into sourcing decisions and that risk findings influence selection, contract terms, and ongoing oversight. Beginners often assume that if a provider is reputable, risk is low, but even reputable providers can have outages, breaches, and operational failures, and shared provider failures can impact many customers at once. Integrating sourcing into GEIT means evaluating risk not only at acquisition but throughout the relationship, because provider risk changes over time. This includes monitoring provider performance, security posture, and business stability, and adjusting controls or contingency plans when conditions shift. It also includes understanding concentration risk, where too much depends on one provider or one region, and deciding whether diversification or redundancy is needed. Governance uses risk information to guide not just who to source from, but how to structure the relationship to remain resilient. When risk management is integrated, sourcing supports resilience rather than becoming a hidden fragility. Performance management and measurement are where sourcing integration becomes visible to leaders because this is how leaders see whether spending is producing outcomes. Integrating sourcing into GEIT requires defining measurable outcomes for contracted services, such as availability, response time, recovery time, and quality of support communication, and ensuring these measures are reported and reviewed. Many enterprises rely on SLA terms, but do not review them regularly or do not connect them to business impact, which turns SLA into paperwork. Governance should connect provider performance measures to enterprise outcomes, such as customer experience and operational stability, so leaders can decide whether to expand, improve, or replace a service. Measurement also supports optimization because it reveals which services are delivering value and which are redundant or underperforming. Beginners might assume that once a service is in place, performance is fixed, but provider relationships can be improved through governance-driven reviews and accountability. Regular review cadence ensures issues are identified early rather than accumulating until renewal time. When sourcing performance is monitored as part of governance, providers become accountable partners rather than opaque dependencies. Financial governance also strengthens when sourcing is integrated because sourcing costs can drift over time and become difficult to challenge once services are embedded. Governance should ensure the enterprise understands the total cost of ownership, TCO, of source services, including scaling costs, add-on features, support costs, and the cost of integration and coordination across multiple providers. It should also ensure there is an internal owner responsible for monitoring cost trends and aligning spending to value. Beginners often think cost governance is primarily about negotiating price, but in mature governance, cost control is also about controlling demand, avoiding redundancy, and ensuring services are right-sized. Integrating sourcing into GEIT helps prevent silent cost growth by requiring usage reviews and by linking spending to capability outcomes. Financial controls also support resilience because the enterprise can avoid overdependence on a service that becomes financially unsustainable. When cost is visible and linked to performance, leaders can make trade-offs with confidence rather than being surprised by budget overruns. This strengthens both optimization and control. Accountability is another integration point that must be designed explicitly because sourcing introduces shared responsibility models. The enterprise must define who owns the provider relationship, who monitors performance, who coordinates changes, and who leads during incidents. If internal accountability is unclear, governance cannot enforce external accountability, and the relationship will drift. Beginners sometimes assume procurement owns vendor management, but procurement often does not own day-to-day operational outcomes, so governance must ensure operational ownership exists. This includes defining escalation paths, decision rights, and communication expectations across internal and external parties. Accountability also includes ensuring that data ownership and stewardship expectations are maintained even when data is processed by providers. When accountability is clear, problems are addressed faster and fewer issues fall between organizational boundaries. Governance integration therefore requires not only contracts, but also internal operating procedures that make the relationship manageable. This is how the enterprise retains control while benefiting from external capabilities. Resilience planning becomes stronger when sourcing is integrated because governance can require contingency plans, exit strategies, and tested recovery expectations for critical outsourced capabilities. If a provider fails, the enterprise must know how it will continue operating, how it will communicate, and how it will recover or transition. Beginners often assume that providers handle resilience, but provider resilience is not the same as enterprise resilience because the enterprise may still be unable to operate without the service. Governance should therefore require that critical services have defined recovery expectations, defined incident communication practices, and clear data export and transition mechanisms. It should also consider whether diversification is needed, such as using multiple providers for critical functions or designing systems to fail gracefully. Integrating sourcing into GEIT ensures these resilience considerations are part of planning and procurement rather than afterthoughts. When resilience is designed early, the enterprise can move fast without creating a fragile dependency. This is one of the most important long-term benefits of integration. As we close, integrating sourcing strategies into GEIT strengthens optimization and control by making sourcing a governed discipline rather than a set of isolated purchasing decisions. Optimization improves when sourcing is managed as a portfolio, reducing redundancy, controlling vendor sprawl, and aligning services to enterprise capabilities and architecture direction. Control improves when governance ensures clear responsibilities, enforceable controls, meaningful performance measurement, and ongoing risk oversight throughout the provider relationship. Integration also improves financial predictability by making TCO visible and linking spending to measurable outcomes, while resilience improves through contingency planning and exit readiness. For brand new learners, the key takeaway is that sourcing is one of the strongest levers governance has, because it shapes the enterprise's dependency structure, risk profile, and ability to deliver. When sourcing is integrated into governance, external services become managed capabilities that support strategy rather than uncontrolled dependencies that produce surprise costs and surprise risk. This is how the enterprise can gain speed and flexibility while still maintaining the oversight needed for reliable, secure, and accountable performance over time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.